Welcome to the monthly vinyl voyage. In September 2022, I started an experiment, building myself a new music collection from scratch at a rate of no more than one album a month. 2 years later, it's formed 24 great albums, and I'm taking a bit of time to look at each of these purchases, to learn more about it, and to reflect on what it means to me, and to digress onto any side notes that I find interesting. Thanks for joining me today. This is my record of the month from July 2024, album number 21 in my music collection, and it is Tuesday Night Music Club by Sheryl Crow. So, what does this album mean to me? The big hit single that I remember from this album is All I Want to Do, which was on the radio every day in 1994. I mean, it was everywhere. MTV played it on the hour every hour, and the radio played it even more frequently than that. And I remember it was good. It was insanely catchy. Aged 13, I didn't then see the appeal of the day drinking, but the lyrics merrily bumbled through, anticipating the hook and the shout-along chorus. I can also remember that Crow did a Bond theme, which was and is a big deal. But beyond that, I doubt I could have named any more of her songs, at least not confidently, not being 100% sure it wasn't an Alanis Morissette song. As an album, I came to this years later, borrowed from my university housemate Jeff, and discovered an untapped vein of Americana that really spoke to me. Some of the tracks just pleasantly washed over, but Run Baby Run and Strong Enough and No One Said It Would Be Easy all spoke to me deeply enough that I wanted to learn to play them. It turned out that they're played in some weird keys using alternate tunings, which are not friendly to beginner guitarists, but anyway. At the time I heard this album, I was really just getting into music. I was listening to a lot more, and I'd been learning guitar for a couple of years. I mean, I wasn't about to run off to Nashville, but I had discovered something that had previously been kind of missing for me. Reading the CD insert on this was even more intriguing, and I'll shorten it a little bit. It says, "For the last year or so, I spent most Tuesday nights with a group of musicians, or shall I say artists, at Toad Hall. The crew gathered with nothing more in mind than to experiment and create. Thus, the Tuesday Night Music Club was born, creating the impetus for my album." Now, I just loved the idea of a group of musicians getting together to hang out and jam and record an album. I even started looking for any opportunities to emulate that in a very, very limited capacity. As a student, I was doing loads of different things with a packed social and study schedule, and I didn't know all that many musicians. I would meet up with a friend of mine when I travelled back home and play a bit of guitar, and I also tagged along with a university friend of mine to a few folk sessions in local pubs, something I wish I'd done more of, but I was too shy and too novice to contribute much, if anything, at those gatherings. But I loved the idea. Researching this, I've learned a lot more about the reality of the Tuesday Night Music Club. But before we talk about them, let's start with the main artist of this record. Sheryl Crow was born in 1962 in the small town of Kennett, Missouri. Raised in a working-class family by her mother, who taught piano, and her father, who worked as a lawyer and also a trumpet player, Crow became interested in music at a very early age. After graduating from the University of Missouri with a degree in music composition, performance and education, she worked as a music teacher for a while, and then in '86 she moved to LA, where she landed some jingle singing assignments and then got her first big break as a backup singer on Michael Jackson's International Bad Tour. In concert, she often sang the female duet part on I Just Can't Stop Loving You, and was inaccurately rumoured by the tabloids to have been Jackson's lover. Now, I've talked about the album Bad before. It's my top MJ album, last of the Quincy Jones arc, and if you look carefully in the liner notes, you'll find occasional credits to Bill Bottrell, who will come to play as a big part of the Sheryl Crow story, but that's still to come. After spending 2 years on the road with Jackson, Crow resumed her search for a record deal, but found that record companies were only interested in making her a dance pop singer, which wasn't where she wanted to go. She continued her work as a session vocalist for Sting, Rod Stewart, Stevie Wonder, Foreigner, Joe Cocker, Sinead O'Connor and Don Henley. She also developed her songwriting skills enough to have her compositions recorded by Winona Judd, Celine Dion and Eric Clapton. For all of her contacts and hard graft, Crow's efforts to establish herself as a solo singer-songwriter appeared to be going nowhere, until a chance 1991 meeting with Grammy Award-winning British producer Hugh Padgham. He was in Hollywood to mix Sting's Soul Cages album, and had been urged by the A&M Records to work with more new artists. Listening to a tape that Sheryl had handed him, featuring demos of synth pop come gospel songs that she'd written or co-written, Padgham realised that he'd stumbled upon the opportunity to do just that. He said, "She's a good keyboard player, she sounded great, she was writing these really good songs, she was going to be a star." On the strength of Hugh Padgham's recommendation, Sheryl Crow signed a 2-album deal in the spring of 1991. Work was scheduled to start at A&M's state-of-the-art Hollywood facility in September. Assigned to produce, Padgham assembled several of the musicians with whom he'd worked on Sting's album. Sheryl would sing, as well as play piano and Hammond organ, and she was also given the opportunity to co-produce, working closely alongside the man whose credits included Genesis, The Police, Phil Collins, Sting, David Bowie, and Paul McCartney and Michael Jackson. With a budget of around $250,000, the basic idea to save money and time was to use Crow's existing demo songs and simply improve parts as necessary. For example, replacing the fake piano with a real piano, to overdub real drums and to redo the vocals properly. And to start with, it was heading in the right direction. The sessions were fun and they were laughing constantly. But artistic differences started to come to the fore. Mindful of Padgham's status and experience, as well as the opportunity he presented her with, Sheryl largely went along with his choices while the overdubs were taking place. But as the sessions progressed, she began to realise that what she'd let herself in for was a sonic treatment that bore many of the hallmarks of Paul Mark's work with Sting, Genesis and Phil Collins. It was clean, highly polished and heavily layered, with little front and centre space in which to highlight her vocals. And much like the dance pop route that she'd turned down previously, what they were producing in no way sounded like the rough-hewn edges of Sheryl's self-image. In addition to the problems encountered when trying to recapture the spirit of the demos, when replacing the synth sounds with piano and supplemental guitars, the major source of discontent for Sheryl was the album's intended focal point, her own voice. Somehow it just didn't have the right feel, it lacked punch and emotion. But she couldn't convince Hugh Padgham of this. As far as he was concerned, she was being paranoid. To him, her performances were great, but he agreed that they didn't have 10 or 11 killer songs. In the end, they felt it had gone as far as it was going to. No big fallout or fireworks, but neither were very pleased either. And a full year into the production process, Padgham called time. A&R Records agreed to Crowe's request to give her musician boyfriend Kevin Gilbert a chance to remix the record. Then the producer and engineer Bill Bottrell was eventually asked to step in as well. However, by this time the sound was imprinted on the tapes and not a lot could be done to effect the desired change. Entitled Sheryl Crow A&M 75021 53934, it was only manufactured as a promotional test pressing cassette, not meant for DJ distribution. The 4 at the end of the catalogue number means it was a tape cassette, where 2 would have meant a CD. There was never a legitimate CD of this album, despite numerous bootlegs being out there. With expenditure exceeding $450,000 and a tentative release date only a month away in September 1992, the painful decision was taken by a frustrated record company and a humiliated artist to shelve a project that they both agreed would be an unmarketable dead-end debut at a time when grunge was king. Soon, rumours began to circulate that A&M were dropping Crowe from the label, but nothing could have been further from the truth. Instead, showing remarkable faith in the talents of a newcomer, David Andal placed her in the hands of Bill Bottrell. Bill was at the core of Tuesday Night Music Club in many senses. He was already an experienced producer, engineer, writer and musician whose lists of credit ranged from Madonna to Michael Jackson. In fact, Bottrell co-wrote and co-produced Jackson's biggest ever #1 hit, Black or White. Nevertheless, working out of his own studio named Toad Hall in Pasadena, Bottrell had chosen to turn his back on contemporary recording methods and on what he perceived as overblown superstar projects in favour of employing old techniques with new artists, working live, working more immediately, leaving things raw and never doing demos. He said, "Everything gets recorded and everything is a potential master. We try leaving things looser and going for the proverbial 3 minutes of magic in a room." Which is almost exactly echoes the experiences of Tracy Chapman recording her debut album in 1987. Stop layering bits on, strip it back, do the tracking live and have the musicians playing together. It was more than just getting a good take. It was about capturing a feeling. But back to Bill. Having spent a decade working with African American R&B acts, observing how they tapped into their musical roots, Bottrell had determined that his own soul came from the Appalachian and country music. The roots of the Tuesday Night Music Club can be traced back to 2 significant pre-1992 releases. The critically acclaimed 1986 album Boomtown by David Bervold and David Ricketts, and the 1990 self-titled album by Toy Matinee, featuring Kevin Gilbert, Brian McLeod and producer Bill Bottrell. Bill Bottrell, who had become a mentor to Kevin Gilbert through their work on Toy Matinee, included Gilbert in the sessions for Madonna and Michael Jackson. When Gilbert began his solo debut, he sublet a space next to Bottrell's studio, Toad Hall in Pasadena. In early 1992, Bottrell initiated a weekly jam session at Toad Hall. Frustrated with the isolation of working alone, Bottrell and Gilbert missed the days of spontaneous jamming without the pressure of creating hit records or seeking approval from A&R personnel. They began gathering on Tuesday nights simply to have fun and enjoy the music. These sessions evolved into the Tuesday Night Music Club, a collaborative group of artists that included bassist Dan Schwartz. The members, embittered by the pop music industry, sought to rediscover the joy in music. They would drink beers, write songs and discuss various topics, often creating music on the spot. Kevin Gilbert described the process as loose and spontaneous, with members playing instruments they weren't proficient in, resulting in unique and eclectic sounds. Bill Bottrell would sift through the music the next morning, refining their creations. By the end of 1992, David Berwald released their second solo album, Triage, which featured contributions from the Tuesday Night Music Club members, making the first collective release. On Crow's first night with the Tuesday Night Music Club, which was September 15th, 1992, David Berwald introduced the idea of the song Leaving Las Vegas, inspired by the galley proofs of an unpublished novel by his close friend John O'Brien. Playing the simple G-C-D chord structure he had already worked on, Berwald demonstrated the song's first few lines and chorus. Soon everyone else was contributing ideas. Kevin Gilbert added a verse, while Bottrell provided the backbone with a loop he described as a weird punk country groove. And he encouraged Crow to replace Berwald as lead vocalist. Berwald, who was worse for wear, was placed on a keyboard that had a monophonic sound, meaning that no matter how many keys you play, it only plays one note. You can hear it on the record going all over the place. Following Bottrell's advice to play down the vibrato in her voice, Crow melded a laid-back, devil-may-care attitude with a searing, in-your-face vocal delivery, alternating between low-registered drawl and high-octane intensity. She was singing like no one ever had before, and she made that up, Bottrell asserts. It came from her. It came from country. It came from Missouri. It came from this crunchy sound blaring in her headphones. And it came from the fact she could barely hear herself. Leaving Las Vegas was a simple song, but it provided the template for the Tuesday Night Music Club. The question of exactly how those jam sessions became an album is debated acrimoniously. In some versions, the Tuesday Night Music Club turned into week-long recording sessions for Sheryl Crow's new album over the course of nearly a year, where everything was intended to be collaborative with equal songwriting credits. Another version, including some comments by Bottrell, claimed that there were only really 3 more meetings that really contributed to the album, and the rest of it was just sweat and blood from me and Sheryl. Despite it clearly having been a collaborative album to some degree, both Crow and A&M wanted to market her as an archetypal singer-composer, and they did so aggressively. Although most of the album tracks had multiple songwriting credits, there was very little mention of the artists in the presswork, other than the title. Tuesday Night Music Club would go on to become one of the most successful debut albums in music history. But when the album was first released, sales were predictably slow. No one knew who Crow was. The first 2 singles released from the album were Run Baby Run and What I Can Do For You, and neither charted. Leaving Las Vegas was the 3rd single, and while it made number 60 in the US and 66 in the UK, it garnered significant airplay and it built anticipation for Crow's next single and her breakout hit. Released in July 1994, All I Wanna Do quickly gained traction and became Crow's biggest US hit. Peaking at number 2, it was high on the Billboard Hot 100 for 6 consecutive weeks. It reached number 1 in Australia and Canada. It peaked at number 4 in New Zealand and the UK. The song's popularity was further bolstered by its music video, directed by David Hogan and Roman Coppola, which received heavy rotation on MTV. But the good times were interrupted when a few of the musicians groused about the songwriting and publishing splits. Crow said everyone was duly credited and made a lot of money, but still the backlash gnawed at her for a long time. Crow told Billboard magazine that there were guys in the group who were feeling bitter about the record doing so well. Maybe I should have called the album something else. There are people out there that are built the way they're built, and they were never going to be happy the way that anything turns out, she said. If the record had sold 5,000 copies, then they would have been happier than the fact it sold as many as it did. Tuesday Night Music Club has sold 10 million records overall. The album won Crow 3 Grammy Awards in 1995, Record of the Year, Best New Artist, and Best Female Pop Vocal Performance. In early 1995, when Sheryl Crow won Grammy Gold for her debut album, her bank account was hardly glistening. The album had already sold about 2 million copies in the 7 months before Crow walked off with the honours for Best New Artist, Record of the Year, and Female Pop Vocalist. But it was not until the following year that the rock singer-songwriter received her first royalty check. She recalled in an interview with Reuters, "My manager was still working out of a storage unit. That was his office, and I was still driving an old Corvair and paying my rent." That's the way it's set up, that the money comes in and they, the record label, hold it for as long as possible, and you ultimately have to make threats to get the money. She said that things got nasty, but ultimately her relationship with A&M Records was a happy one. This problem's not uncommon. Record labels spend a fortune establishing new artists, and it can take a while for them to recoup the cost of recoup their expenses. Moreover, Crow had recorded the album with Hugh Padgham before Tuesday Night Music Club, so she owed the label for the cost of making 2 albums. But eventually, the royalty checks quickly piled up, and Crow's career soared. Crow followed up with a second album, unambiguously titled Sheryl Crow, in 1996. The album was a strong response to the whispers and grousing that had surrounded her debut album, with Crow taking on a much more central role in its creation. The original plan had been for her to co-produce again with Bill Bottrell, but he was happy to leave the project, allowing Crow to produce the album for herself. She also wrote or co-wrote every song, making a direct assertion of her artistic independence. Whilst she'd certainly learned from all her Tuesday Night Music Club experiences, this album would be just hers. The tone and style of the album were darker, more political, and musically more adventurous than her debut. Tracks like Redemption Day and Home showcase her depth and maturity. The album featured big hits such as If It Makes You Happy and Every Day is a Winding Road, and A Change Would Do You Good, all of which she co-wrote, helping to establish herself as a serious artist. The critical reception was widely positive, and the album won her 2 more Grammys, including Best Rock Album, and cemented her credibility as both a songwriter and producer. Back to this album and my copy. Tuesday Night Music Club was originally released 3rd of August 1993. It was widely released on cassette and CD formats that dominated the market. However, there was also a vinyl pressing released in Ecuador. While vinyl was already in decline in the major markets like US and Europe, some regions, including parts of Latin America, continued to manufacture records locally due to lingering demand and lower production costs. The 1993 vinyl is very rare. But thankfully, to celebrate the album's 30th anniversary, there is a 2023 repressing, which is a proper 140-gram black vinyl LP version of the 7-time certified platinum album. Bernie Grundman, who originally mastered the album, used the original half-inch flat master tape to create a new master and then cut lacquers. This ensures that the repress has a high quality sound and stays true to the original recordings. And it sounds superb, which is the most important part for me. I was never a huge fan of the cover art. I thought it was a bit bland and quite generic Americana clip art. But it was a debut album, so it's sensible to put a big picture of yourself front and centre. What I really don't get was their choice of that cover shot. I've seen the cover photo described as her looking sheepish, but for me, I look at the picture and I empathise with a slight awkwardness in her pose. The repressing is housed in a gatefold sleeve that includes liner notes by Sheryl Crow, along with updated artwork directed by Rich Frankel with design by Jean Krikorian. The packaging is pretty clear and it has a high quality. It's all right. I kind of wish that there was a bit more updated, maybe. My favourite track on the album is the opening track, Run Baby Run. It's a poignant power pop ballad with a particularly rich opening sound, which does well to set the tone for the rest of the album with its depth and strong vocal performance. The verses feature Beatles-esque chords creating a classic feel. As a close second, the opening track on side 2, No One Said It Would Be Easy. This is another reflective song that deals with the challenges and complexities of life. The lyrics are thoughtful and the melody is soothing, which makes it a standout track for me. What's Not to Love? Probably my least favourite track on the album is track 6, the Na song. It's fun. It's an upbeat track with a playful vibe. The song includes like rap-like verses, which add a bit of a unique twist to the album. Someone said it's reminiscent of Red Hot Chili Peppers fronted by a drunk mum at a wedding, which is a bit harsh but quite accurate. I mean, it's not terrible. I can't think of anyone else who was stretching quite so far out of their own genre like this, but at least not in the 90s and not on a debut album. Listening to the CD, the transition from the Na song into No One Said It Would Be Easy, it's a bit jarring, which is an experience that's different on tape or vinyl. Because of the enforced break between the sides, it's good to have to stop and flip over the record between those two tracks. Let's just talk briefly about Sheryl Crow and Taylor Swift. They're big fans of each other, and that much is public and genuine. But I think they have something else interesting in common, something that goes a bit beyond the mutual adoration or the surface level similarities. It's about how they sing, or maybe more accurately, how much they choose not to sing. Technically, they both have plenty of tools at their disposal. Sheryl's voice sits comfortably in the mezzo-soprano range, warm, slightly husky, capable of cutting power when needed. Taylor's voice, also a mezzo, leans more breathy and conversational, but she's far more in control than she's often given credit for. And both of them have solid vibrato, the natural wavering in pitch that can add depth and richness. And they know how to use melisma, the stylistic stretching of a single syllable over several notes that you hear all over R&B and gospel, although Whitney Houston still easily wears the crown for that. But here's the thing, they rarely use those tools to show off. In fact, they often keep things very simple, just clean, emotional, direct melodies that go exactly where you expect them to and stick when they get there. That's a big part of why their songs are so singable. You don't need to be a trained vocalist to follow along with Soak Up the Sun or You Belong With Me. You just sing. The melodies are built to be remembered, and more importantly, they're built to be joined. That's not laziness, that's craft. And I think this goes back to their shared grounding in country, or at least country-influenced songwriting. Sheryl Crow doesn't always get labelled as a country artist, but it's all in there, woven through the phrasing, the lyric-first structure and the emotionally plain speaking. When working with Bill Bottrell on Tuesday Night Music Club, he was a bit into a new country phase himself, consciously pulling in some of those stripped down, rootsy influences. And it showed. Bottrell helped shape not just the songs, but Sheryl's vocal delivery too, encouraging her to ease off on the vibrato and to lean into a flatter, more grounded tone. The slightly dry, almost casual vocal style is part of what made her voice feel real, approachable, like a conversation, not a performance. And then there's Taylor Swift, who of course came directly out of Nashville. She grew up in a tradition where the voice is there to serve the story, not to steal the spotlight. In classic country, and even the more pop-oriented strands that remember where they came from, vocal restraint isn't a limitation, it's a value. You don't sing to impress, you sing to connect, to get the feeling across. That's the common thread. Both Swift and Crow could easily deliver dramatic phrasing, long melodic runs, or lush vibrato if they wanted. They have the skill, but they rarely do. Instead, they give us melodies we can follow, phrasing that invites rather than dazzles. They leave space in the song for the listener. And that's what makes their music feel personal, not just memorable, but singable. As a notable debut record and a piece of pop culture, Tuesday Night Music Club stands up strong. It has some really well sequenced tracks, which land without the polish of 90s overdubs. The album's singles, such as All I Wanna Do, Strong Enough and Leading Las Vegas, have become so ingrained in popular culture that many people will know all the lyrics and find themselves singing along if they hear them on the radio. For me, the emotion and struggle of Run Baby Run and Strong Enough really hit home. The idea of belonging to a music club that just jammed together and sounded really cool pushed me to do more in music. Well, I hope you've enjoyed some of my memories of this album. I'm sure I've made mistakes in my research and presentation, but thank you for listening.